Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Dr. Dan Ford, the director of the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine.
Great. Well, I'm going to just give the perspective again of somebody from a large medical school working with lots of clinical research groups, where they're, many times working on a specific disease. They may have started off focused on, a more laboratory-based or pathophysiology-related research, and as their career matures, they begin to think more about, well, what are we going to do about treatment? How are we going to actually help to improve these the lives of these patients? And they've got choices to make on which way to go. One of the exercise or formats that we use at Hopkins is called the Research Studio, which is a group that says, look, we've got a problem. Which methodologies should we employ to try to address that problem? And so I've sort of seen that perspective when we go through that. I will point out, too, that sometimes, yes, there are junior investigators that may be willing to more quickly, take on real-world evidence, but I wouldn't exclude the older investigators. I say that, and Greg, maybe go back to our physician tradition thing, that younger investigators don't want to rock the boat too much. They want to get in the club. They want to make sure that their career gets started, and sometimes they're less likely to be willing to take a more risky approach. In fact, they want to first establish themselves with the more traditional methodology. So this is a little bit how I talk to the investigator who's has a problem, trying to say what approach should they take. Certainly database observational studies that we've talked about, which again, many times they start with a registry that may be more research oriented, but then are trying to look at real world evidence. Well, what does it mean if you go that way? Well, you're going to be more dependent on statistical colleagues to help you with it. I mean, I think that's the reality of it. And when we talk a little bit like, propensity scores and that, I mean, how many times do practice guidelines change based on a study with a propensity score? It's certainly not instrumental variables, which nobody can easily understand or express to audience. So you have to be willing to find that statistical colleague and trust them. You need to be comfortable with data that are less precise, and that's hard. And you have to talk about, when you have 10 measures of something in the clinical record, you throw out a few, or how your approach. We don't accept every data piece in the EMR. And what we'll see here, I do think you don't realize how little physicians and providers actually work with the data in the EMR to understand it. We all put the data in, but we have much more limited experiences to understand that data, to look at it. And we're really working hard on how do you do those queries? How do we let a physician to query the EMR by themselves and look at their own data versus de-identified across the data? If they're not using the data, they're not making the data better. They don't see that cycle of why I want to do this. And even if you say, well, what do physicians see? Well, they see some outcome data, they see outcome measures, they see the quality measures, but they don't see the raw data. They don't understand it. The other aspect about it is, well, it's good to have, ICD and disease codes in there. Anybody working in this field quite quickly says they want better lab information. They want better imaging information. They want better pathology information. They want, echocardiogram data to be computable. We did this a couple years ago. It took us, we're talking 6 leading academic centers. None of us had pulmonary function tests in a computable form. They were on PDFs. And we all had to work through that process of being able to use the data in a way. So it's not just the disease. If you can't give them a little bit broader scope of the data that they can work with, they lose interest pretty quickly. And that goes back to the not easy to investigate any biological pathways. If you don't have some of this other data available, it makes it seem like a data exercise and analysis that doesn't use their full range of what they know. The good thing about it is, relatively short time from inception to completion, and we understand it. And, in some sense, less regulated, where we're talking, right, that may be changing, clinicaltrials.gov registration maybe isn't required for an observational, need to publish all the results. I do think anybody that works with this understands that observational data, we do not publish every finding, and everybody believes that the results can be biased because of that. Standard randomized clinical trials. The people that have grown up in this area, what we were talking about, particularly in pharma companies as well. They need to be committed to recruitment and data collection. It gives them an opportunity to investigate biological pathways more. They know it's highly regulated, analysis relatively uncomplicated, but they generally know that the conclusions can have high impact, and that the field still will give that, when they go to their meetings or go to publish in high impact journals, the randomized clinical trials done in the standard fashion are still going to be pretty much a short ticket to where they want to go. One thing I don't have in here, and it's interesting that, in our EMR, we're having much more where every time you order a test, you know how much it costs. It's a slightly annoying, but we're learning. It makes you think about the cost. The one thing that doesn't happen when people read publications, they don't see the cost of that trial. They don't see what each exercise costs. So when we do these exercises, we say, oh, clinical trial would be good for everything. Yeah, it'd be great. You have $50 million to do it. And if we started to publish the cost of the trial as part of the publication, everybody would get a better sense of, well, is this randomized clinical trial really 50 times better than what you may be seeing with an observational data analysis? I think it's important, too, to understand who's the target for the research report, right? And we knew this. And part of it, it makes the world, working in a complex world is something you have to think about. And we talk a lot about engaging with the stakeholders before you start a study. It is an important exercise, but it takes time, right? Who is it? Is it a regulator? Is it the payer? Getting clinicians, getting patients, getting the health system, spending that pre-study time has value, but to somebody that just wants to get things done and get started, you have to remind them of that. And again, observational methods much more difficult to explain than the usual randomized clinical trial. And I think anybody that has seen this and seen how there's certain physicians that and health professionals that are able to easily explain the observational methods, but most of them become less excited and engaged when they try to do that. I do want to point out this thing about health systems tempted to make decisions based on their own data. Everybody has data. We try to do that. We try to use our own data for observational. A lot of times our own health system data, it's just one health system. It's not that good. You have to really make sure that while we like people to look at it in their own system, you have to take the preponderance of evidence, and sometimes your data from your health system does not trump the other 10 reports. And finding that right balance at the same time engaging the clinical researchers in understanding real-world evidence is something we have to just make sure that we keep on balance. The other one, again, about choices, the one that I do think we should consider is innovative clinical trial designs like pragmatic designs or cluster randomized designs. And I think both of these have the advantages of somebody that's transitioning from traditional clinical trials to more real-world evidence. But it does take that time for setup. the need to get cooperation of the health system and healthcare providers, the need to incorporate the EMR, IT data sources, and get all of the data people on board, clearly is something that people, think about. Because again, they contrast it to the usual clinical trial. I just had to hire a couple of research coordinators to do it. I could do it in my own clinic space. I didn't have to get the help of a lot of people. I kind of keep the IRB out there and the sponsors out. When you do the pragmatic trials, all of a sudden you have to spend that upfront time getting all the partners together. And in today's world, it's difficult. Frankly, even at Hopkins, sometimes it's because there's competing trials. A health system, an engaged health system, may only have a few of those that they're ready to do. And I do say with the cluster design that we've seen, and there are certainly some ethical issues related to this without required consent, the conduct of the study can be relatively easy, and it can be completed much more quickly than others. So the point is, you have a lot of time on the setup side, but the conduct is actually, and completion of the study is not terrible. And then you have to worry a little bit about the analysis component, which will be more complicated. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have a lot of clinical investigators that either early or late in their career have been working, through the traditional ways to try to improve the lives of their patients and understand what treatments work. We have new tools for them. They're not going to be able to do each one of these on their own, starting from scratch. We have to provide them with the support that they need to be willing to move out of these. And I don't want, at least at our institution, we don't want methodology experts that just say, I do this and I want to try to find all the problems that fit into that. We want somebody that works with a group of patients, have identified, a problem they're trying to solve, and has enough comfort in the toolbox of methodologies that they can pick the method that's going to help them answer that question, and they're going to have the support they need to be able to move across methodologies. But that is a big challenge we're expecting a lot from our clinical researchers, but I think they're up to the task if we give them the support.